Hello, y'all, and welcome to Writer's Lunch this week. You might have finished a novel last year, and what are you going to do with it? Anna is here with an awesome thing about preparing your query packet, something that she is very familiar with. But also, I love that Writer's Lunch does this because we're all studying. And so, Anna, I do hope that in doing this, it really helped you kind of like examine your query packet and make it better as well.
So thanks, Sean. Putting together a query packet is not easy. I mean, it's hard to know, like, especially if you're just starting out, you haven't ever queried before. It's hard to know, what you're supposed to have, what everything's supposed to look like, and things like that. So we're going to talk about all of that today. Honestly, we're going to mostly focus on the three main components of the query packet. And honestly, each one of those things could be its own hour. But so this is just in brief. This is an overview of your query packet and how to put it together and how to start looking for agents. And we've talked about some of these things on Writer's Lunches before. I know I did one on query letters a while back, and Daphne talked about querying on one of her Writer's Lunches. So we've talked about some of these like individual things before, but we've never really put it all together. So hopefully, what I'm hoping is that this talk will give all of you a good idea of, at the very least, where to start with your query packet and where to start looking for literary agents if that's something that you want to do. So, getting into it, those of y'all who are longtime attendees of Writer's Lunch know me. I write as AP Hawkins. I'm currently querying my first novel, sci fantasy novel. I've had several short stories published in magazines and anthologies. Most recently, my short story Once Abandoned was released on Escape Pod last week. And I like to do crafts. I like fabric and fiber arts. That's kind of like embroidery and sewing and things. That's kind of my preferred craft. So this is my current craft project. I just finished this quilt top and I'm working on getting it put together so that I can huddle up under it, but I'm probably going to miss the cold weather. It's probably going to be warm by the time I'm done with it. So, oh well. But all right, let's get into the material. What is a query packet? So what do agents even want to see from you when you're submitting your novel to them for consideration? The main components of a query packet are your query letter, which is the number one most important thing that you need to have. And that's not to say that, the first pages aren't important, because obviously they are. But the query letter is the very first thing that an agent is going to read when they look at your query packet. So you want, in your query letter, you want to be giving a good impression. You want to be making the reader interested in your book and your characters and in you as an author. So it's a sales pitch for your book, mainly. That's its main purpose. But it's also, your first self-introduction to whatever agents you're querying. So you also have to use the query letter to introduce yourself. Your first pages is your another main component. This, I think, it's my experience, this is of secondary importance to the query letter because, again, the agent's going to read the query letter first. And if they don't like what they see in the query letter, they're not going to read your first pages. So first pages are important, but the query letter is the most important. The first pages need to engage and impress and need to make the agent want to read more. You don't want an agent bored, while they're reading your first pages. You want them to, be looking forward to the next page to see what's coming next. And, to be kind of upset when they run out, because that's how they're going to come to you asking for the rest of your manuscript or for a partial manuscript. And then the third main component of a query letter is a synopsis. In my experience, querying agents, many of them don't ask for this. Some do, but I think probably 90% of the agents I've queried have not asked for a synopsis at all. But even if it's not being asked for, as a writing exercise, it's still an important exercise to have done, because it can help you kind of get to know your book a little bit better and get to know like what the most important things are in your book. So it's an important writing exercise. Even if you aren't being asked for a synopsis by agents, it's important to still have one on hand. And, writing one can also help you with your query letter and things like that. So and we'll talk about all of these in a little bit more detail and how to like put them together and what the expectations are.
And if I can...
Sorry, what was that?
And if I can make a food metaphor with this, your query letter is seeing it on the shelf. Does it look cool? Does it have a cool box? Is it something you want to do? something you want to make. First pages is buying it. Awesome. You get it through the cashier. You've paid for it with, in this case, time. A synopsis then is like actually cooking it. Sometimes you buy something, you don't actually even cook it. You thought it was cool. It sits in your pantry forever. At some point, someone's going to ask you for a synopsis.
Yeah.
Might be, after you've sent your partial, after you sent your full. It could be just an editor asking for it after it's actually been sold. But you will at some point need a synopsis, and to struggle to, oh no, I need to get this right now, is not fun once the elation has died down over, yay, I have an agent.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely an important thing to have like in your back pocket. On the rare occasions that you will need it, it's important to have one. Do not neglect the synopsis just because it's not as important as the other two. There are a few other things that you might see agents asking for when you go to submit a query. These possible components include a one-sentence pitch. I've had several agents asking for this, where they just want you to essentially sell your book to them in one sentence, which is really hard. So that is something important that you should, try to write out. But that also serves as like, people talk about your elevator pitch. You need to have an elevator pitch where you can just like talk about your book, on a 30-second elevator ride. That's kind of what this is. It's one sentence that is essentially the purpose of it is to get someone interested in reading your book. So, I've seen several agents asking for this. Not all do, but quite a bit. I've had more ask for a one-sentence pitch than a synopsis. So,
if I can pull this from the chat,
yeah.
Rhonda says it's a log line as well. I threw in, it's a Netflix description.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's essentially yes, and yeah, I like the the sick face that Rhonda sent in the chat. Yeah, this is sending a query to agents, right? So the query packet, the query letter, the one sentence pitch, it's all sales stuff. Like you're trying to sell your book to the agent, and so you have to, as the author, as someone who writes fiction, who writes stories, writing a sales pitch is a very different skill, and it's one that can be difficult. I have really struggled with figuring out the right sales pitch for my book, and I still don't think I'm quite there, even though I've been querying off and on for a while now. I don't think I've quite hit the right pitch for my book yet, but every iteration, I think it gets better. I hope it gets better. So this will take practice.
This just kind of goes to show you as well, because like we can give advice, but it's very hard if you are personally attached to a story to know the best way to sell it oftentimes. Right. So don't feel bad if you're in that same boat as AP where you're like, I honestly don't know how to do this, because chances are you do. It's just because of our psychology. We don't know how to do it on our own for ourselves. So I don't know if you have this in here, but like getting feedback, sharing it with other people in the same, pool of writers as you, and seeing what they think is never a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard because, I mean, I can't sit here and tell you the formula for how to sell your book. All I can do is tell you this is what agents are expecting in your query packet. So this is what you should prepare, and, some general tips on how to prepare it. I cannot, unfortunately, there's no formula for the right words you need to say to get an agent interested in your book. But yeah, that's a good point, Shannon. Having, people you can go to, read it and, help you with it is really important. Just having other sets of eyes. And it's important that those people have possibly read, is that some of those people at least have read your book so that they have kind of an idea of like, what you're trying to get at when you're writing your query letter. Anyway, going back into this, you can also expect to see agents asking for comparison titles. These are usually included as part of your query letter, but a lot of agents will ask for them separately as well as part of the form that you fill out when you send a query. You can also expect some agents to ask for content warnings. This would be triggers like, violence, sexual assault, things like that are in your book. Some agents want to come in prepared for whatever content might be in your book, or whatever, potentially distressing content might be in your book. So that's why the content warnings are there. And yeah, basically you should be prepared to fill out a form. Most agents, in my experience, are using Query Manager nowadays, and that's a form that you go to fill out, and you have to fill out all your information, all your books information, and you're copying and pasting your query letter and your first pages and possibly your synopsis into this form. And like Sean mentioned in the chat before, pay attention to all the formatting asks. That is a good point. However, a lot of times they don't really have formatting asks, because if they're using Query Manager, you're just copying and pasting into a form and there's really no formatting to be done. One thing that they'll ask for Query Manager is that when you're pasting your first pages, instead of trying to indent the first line of a paragraph, they ask you to just skip a line. That's really the only formatting thing that you'll ever see on the Query Manager forms. Some agents still accept queries via email instead. Those will have like specific formatting that they want you to send your first pages in. They want it to be formatted a specific way because you're attaching it as a Word document. And but sometimes if they ask for emails, they'll want you to just copy and paste into the body of the email. So it really just depends on the agent. Most of them, in my experience, are using Query Manager, but some are still using email. So just follow their instructions. Whatever it says on their website for how to query them, do that. And, follow whatever instructions you get.
Even if the instructions are different than the Query Manager application they use, somehow simultaneously do both. No,
yes.
But Anna, how would you take that if they do have a Query Manager, Query Tracker, or they're working with any of the other query systems, and the information on there is different than the website? What do you think is the best way to move forward on that?
I would do the form. Yeah, I would do the form, because sometimes they will update to using Query Manager, and then something on the website won't be updated properly. The form is there, and like a lot of the forms will have like a paragraph at the top about, hi, this is my Query Manager form, and these are the genres I'm accepting, and I'm open for queries on these days, and blah blah blah. And so yeah, a lot of times those systems, like the form, they update to using the form, and then something on the website is neglected. So if I'm seeing different things on the form versus on the website, I'll do what it says on the form. So, because those, in my experience, are generally the most up to date. All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about each of these main components of your query letter. Does anyone have any questions before we get into this? I see some stuff in the chat. I've been trying to kind of keep an eye on it.
Yeah, Anna, you have met with agents in person and you've also queried them online. Do you find that what they're looking for is different when you're pitching in person?
Yeah, when you're pitching in person, they don't want you to read the query letter to you. If you're pitching to an agent in person, you should have and like your pitch that you talk to them about your book, it can be based on your query letter, but they don't want you to just, sit there and read your query letter off. I find it's better if you're pitching in person, if you can turn the pitch into a conversation versus you just talking at them. And that's kind of hard to do. You kind of have to judge that on an individual basis versus, like, sometimes agents will really want to talk with you and have a conversation, and sometimes in person they don't. And so, but yeah, so when I've talked to agents in person, I wrote a separate pitch that was based on my query letter and mostly focusing on like, my character and like the main kind of plot beats, and then go from there. So, and if you can tell they're really interested, it's easier to turn it into a conversation than if they're not super interested. Someone else.
If I can ask, so will you tell them how you've run into agents in person and what kind of events at?
Yeah, so we have talked with agents at Writing Day workshops events, and I'm actually working freelance for them for those events now. But that's kind of the first time that I pitched agents in person, was at a Writing Day workshop in Houston. I also attended a Futurescapes workshop last fall that was focused on like building your query packet, and got to talk to agents there about what they want to see and stuff like that. Susan has her hand raised.
Yes, I had a question about managers. So what do you think about getting a manager who would have connections to agents and also publishers?
So So like you mean like a social media manager? I'm not really sure.
No,
So
I mean a writer's manager.
yeah. So
Someone who manages writers.
I've never really looked into that. As far as I understand, the role of an agent is kind of that.
So I have heard of people doing that where they hire
Uh-huh.
someone to query for them. And my feedback I've gotten from agents on that is they don't like it because it's really impersonal. Agents and their authors tend to have really close relationships or need to have a close working relationship. And agents want to see like your personality shine through in your query. And that's hard to do when you're having someone else do it for you.
Okay, because that's completely different in screenwriting. And screenwriting, agents only do the business side. They will only do a contract. And you have to have something ready for them. Otherwise, they don't even want to talk to you. And it's
Wow.
the managers who work with the author.
And I was going to say literary managers are almost exclusively for screenwriting, which you
Yeah,
brought up. I mean, and it's not unheard of, especially if you have a little bit of money to hire an assistant to help you with querying. But the downside of that is what Daphne just said, that the voice is different if somebody else is doing it versus you doing it yourself. However, the amount that you can send out, the amount of research you can do, of course, is compounded if somebody else is helping you along with it. So there's
Now,
pros and
you
cons in that regard.
Yeah,
You
and for
did mention having
screenwriting,
connections, and that is something in the publishing world for book publishing that is important and can get you access to agents that are maybe not open otherwise. But a lot of the time, you're going to get those kinds of connections from going to writing conferences and meeting other agents and kind of schmoozing a bit. That's kind of how those connections are
yeah.
made.
And the agent, so the literary agent's role to pitch your book to editors. So that's essentially what you're getting a literary agent for in the first place, is to have someone with connections in the industry to pitch your book to editors who they think might like your book, who they know and have worked with, maybe have worked with before, or whatever. So the agent is kind of, I don't want to call them the middleman, because that sounds like it's like reducing their job, but that's also kind of what they are. They're the go-between between the writers and the editors. And so they essentially, once you get an agent, they turn around and do the same thing you just did with editors. So that's essentially what the relationship is. I saw Cece had her hand raised, but it went away. So I don't know. Cece, did you have a question or a comment?
I didn't have a question. I think Daphne had my thought, like in-person interaction when you literally are telling the person, because you're at a conference or you're back in that environment where you're meeting people in the industry face to face. So she did that as well. I think for me, as I'm listening to the conversation overall, it just reminds me so much of being an actor. And for those of us who are in that world, the notion also that we as writers have to end up doing the same thing. It's very, very similar. So my overall just sort of comment or question is, and not to do anything that we're talking about, but like for me, if I don't have that particular speaking confidence or somehow going up to someone or even writing about my work in a way that describes it, I guess what I'm getting at, I think we have a tendency to maybe downplay the importance of our work or the importance of promoting it like it's a separate thing, and somehow if we toot our own horn that there's something wrong with that, because we all know what our books are about. Maybe we don't have the business language of what genre it's fitting in, or it's a combination of that, but we know what our work and who the characters are. So that's where I was going with my thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, it's writing a query, that an agent will be interested in, is a skill that you have to develop. It's hard. It's really hard. I can tell you from experience, writing a query letter is not easy because, like you said, we aren't in practice of using that kind of like sales pitchy language that we need to get someone interested in our work. And so it's a really important skill to develop. Even if you don't want to do self-publish, or even if you don't want to do traditional publishing, if you're into self-publishing, you still need to develop this kind of language, because, when you're self-publishing, you're selling your book directly to readers. And so, you need to learn how to do that. And, unfortunately, like I said before, there's no one good formula to help you with that. But I do have some tips in here about writing query letters and things like that. So hopefully, can help you get started on that learning curve. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about the first pages and kind of, how to make them stand out a little bit, and what agents are looking for when they ask for your first pages. So in my experience, the first 5 is pretty standard. A lot of agents will ask for your first 5 pages, but it's pretty common to see someone ask for the first 10 to the first 30 even. Some agents will ask for the first 30 pages. I've seen one agent ask for the first 50 pages. That's very unusual. Most will ask for 5 to 10 pages. And that's one of those instructions in the query manager form that you just have to follow. You however many pages they ask for, that's what you got to give them. Some agents will ask based on word count, not on the number of pages, but the math all kind of works out to the same thing. So between 5 and 10, usually, sometimes more than that. And like I said before, they'll often ask you to copy and paste your first pages into the query manager form. So you don't really have to worry about formatting at all, because you're just copy paste and it's done. So this is the big question, prologues. This is the big question that I have had with querying, and I have asked agents about this. I've asked other authors about this, and I have gotten many different answers. So if you have written a book with a prologue, should you include the prologue as part of your first pages? Some agents that I have talked to won't consider books with prologues. If they see a book with a prologue, they say, no, it's not for them. Other agents that I have also talked to love prologues and want to see more books with prologues. So it really just depends on the agent. And, if you have one, should it be included in the first pages? Again, it depends on the agent. A lot of times, the agents who love prologues want them. As if they love a prologue, they want it as part of your first pages. So include the prologue in your first pages. Other agents may not care. They may not specify. If they don't like prologues, sometimes they'll say they don't like prologues on their manuscript wish list. And so then you have to decide as the author, is it worth querying them at all because I have a prologue, or should I just leave it off? And then, if they like my book, tell them later, well, hey, I also have this prologue, or, whatever. So you're not going to get a straight answer on whether or not you should have a prologue at all, or whether or not an agent likes it. I've had, a couple of agents that I've queried have said specifically, if you wrote a prologue, include it. But most of the time you won't get something like that. But in general, for prologues, if you have one, it needs to be a good prologue. And I think we've talked about prologues before on Writer's Lunch. We have some of our Homeworks hosts who don't like prologues. I am personally pro prologue, as long as it's good. Good meaning it should reveal something about the world, the plot, or the characters that's important to the story. So if you have written a prologue, it needs to have something in it that is important to the story that the rest of the book does not really reveal, or something in the prologue comes back later in the rest of the book and comes to fruition. The prologue needs to pay off, and it needs to feel connected to the story and not separate. If it doesn't do any of those things, then why do you have a prologue in the first place? Is the question. So I, as someone who has a prologue in my book, have waffled a lot on whether to include the prologue when I am sending in my first pages. And, again, like I said, I've gotten really opposite feedback from different agents. And I'm kind of on the side now of, if you have it and it's a good prologue, include it in your first pages. Because it is the opening of your book, essentially, is what it's meant to be. So that's kind of where I'm at on prologues, but you're going to get really different answers depending on who you ask. Prologues divide people. So, but yeah, if it's a good prologue, if it's integral to your story and it's, revealing something about your world or your characters or whatever that's important, then include it as part of your first pages. Some other tips about your first pages. The first pages that you're submitting to agents should be your best, most polished part of your novel. Your entire novel, your entire manuscript needs to be well polished before you start querying agents, but your first pages especially need to be polished. Edit them a lot. If you find an agent who asks you to attach your first pages as a file, use the Shun standard manuscript formatting. If you Google Shun standard manuscript format, you'll find the website. It'll be like the first result. Use that unless the agent has specified a different way to format your first pages.
Anna, there is a question pertinent to this in the chat. Basically, when the person is, putting something into Query Manager, it doesn't have a file. You just basically copy and paste the words in.
Yeah.
She's having an issue where it changes the formatting and it looks kind of wonky. And she's asking like, hey, is this even something I should bother about? Or should I spend time and fix the formatting issues that are caused by the copy paste and then the word text box issues that she's running into?
Yeah, I have had that happen many times. Usually it's because, so if you're writing in Microsoft Word, at least in my experience, the reason mine gets messed up is because when Microsoft Word, it does the auto tab, after you've tabbed over the first line so many times, it starts doing auto tabs. And when you copy paste those into the box on the form, it does weird things with them and kind of makes it all look wonky because some lines will be tabbed over and some won't. You default to fixing it because I want it to look as nice as it can. So I default to what they usually say on the form, which is instead of tabbing over, skip a line. So I'll go through mine on the form after I copy paste and make sure all the tabs are gone and it's skipped a line between each. I don't know that agents really care. I haven't heard that any agents care about that. They just want it to be readable, and as long as it's readable, they're fine. But my little anxious heart defaults to making it look as good as I possibly can. So I always fix it. But that's a good question. So back to your first pages. You really want your first pages to engage the reader. I mentioned at the beginning that you want the agent to feel disappointed when they get to the end of your first pages because there's no more. You want them to feel disappointed because they have nothing left to read. You want to leave them wanting to read the rest of your book. So make sure the two main things that you can do in your writing to make sure, or to at least increase the chances that happens, make sure you're introducing the plot early, or at least planting the seeds of the plot. Leave something that propels them forward to the rest of the manuscript in those first pages. Your first pages cannot just be, world building or character introduction. You have to introduce something that will drive the plot forward into the next pages and will drive the reader into wanting to read more. And also try to make them connect with your character early. And, these are things that, as a writer, we all practice doing all the time. But you just want to make sure that these things are happening early enough that the agent is going to want to keep reading your book. And you also want to make sure the rest of your novel lives up to the promise of the first pages. Because if you get an agent, they read your first pages, they love your first pages, and they're like, oh my God, this is great. I have to read more. They ask for your full manuscript, and then the full manuscript falls flat because it doesn't live up to the first pages. Then there's a problem. I mean, the agent's not gonna, they'll at best, if that happens, at best, they'll ask you to revise and resubmit. But you definitely want to make sure that the entire manuscript lives up to the things that you promise in the first pages. And that's why, your first pages should be the most polished part, but your entire thing needs to be pretty well polished before you start sending it to agents at the very least. And that will help. If the writing and the editing is consistently good throughout the manuscript, that will help the agent feel like it's lived up to what you're promising in the first pages. But it also has to do with, plot and character arcs and things like that. So just make sure, your whatever self-editing you do, make sure that, your story is tight and the arcs are satisfactory and they're living up to, what you start building in those first pages. All right. Oh man. Okay. We have like 20 minutes left and I still have a lot to talk about. So moving into the synopsis, which like I said before, it's important, but it's not asked for often. So what is the synopsis? This is essentially your plot summary. This is where you want your spoilers to be. You spoil everything in the synopsis. Every important plot point, you're spoiling in the synopsis. You want whoever's reading your synopsis to have a really good idea of what the plot of your book is. You're trying to hit all the high points. You want to also hit the emotional beats as well as you can to get the agent engaged in your synopsis. 1 page, single spaced, is ideal. This is really, especially if your book is longer, distilling your book, your 100,000 word novel into 1 page is hard. And so this is something that will take practice, that will take a lot of work, is getting your synopsis written. Again, 1 page, from what I've heard from agents, a single page synopsis is ideal. They can go a little bit longer. And sometimes the agents will, specify that they want a 1 page synopsis or a 2 page synopsis. So if they specify a specific length, make sure you're sticking with what they say. Otherwise, try to get it to 1 page if you can, or at least as close to 1 page as you can. Oh, Daphne, I wonder if this is a genre difference. All my agent queries ask for synopsis. It might be a genre difference. It might also be like the trend in the market. Because like you said, that was a few years ago. So I don't know, because I wasn't querying a few years ago, but
I wonder if the advent of like Twitter pitch contests made the single line pitch more popular in terms of, because none of my agents had asked for a single line pitch, but all of yours did. And so I wonder if it's just since I queried and now that you are querying, if that has shifted and they don't care about the synopsis so much as the elevator pitch.
Yeah. Yeah, it might just be changing trends in the publishing industry and in agent preferences.
And this is just a reminder that this is the first contact, right? So like what they're expecting from first contact may have shifted, but it's still good to have it because they may ask for that at the second contact. And you want to stay relevant. So you don't want to be working on trying to make your synopsis perfect and it take you 3 months to give them the synopsis back because they may have forgotten about you at that point.
Right. Yeah. If an agent replies to you asking for more material, you want to be able to send it to them right away. Don't leave them waiting. You want everything ready to go. So that's why, and I don't know if I've stressed this point yet, but your manuscript needs to be ready. The entire manuscript needs to be ready before you start querying. You don't need to just have your first pages ready and then you're like, okay, let me go ahead. The rest of my manuscript is still in an early draft, but my first pages are really good. So I'm going to go ahead and write a query letter and a synopsis, and I'm going to start querying agents. Don't do that.
Yeah, you can do that with nonfiction. If you're doing nonfiction,
yeah, nonfiction.
This only applies to fiction, because if you're doing nonfiction, this is a totally different game.
Right. Yeah.
With nonfiction, you don't have the book written first.
Right. Agents for nonfiction, they generally just want a pitch, and that's all. And then if they like your pitch, they'll say, yeah, write the book. Or
I think it's a pitch and a couple of chapters.
Yeah, something. Yeah, Sean, you've written memoir. So, but yeah, a pitch and maybe the beginning. And then it's like, okay, yeah, I'll send this to editors, and if one of them likes it, then we'll write the rest of the book. But if not, we won't. But with fiction, that full book needs to be written before you start. It needs to be written and it needs to be polished and ready to go. All right. So how do you write a synopsis? Also, thank you for that comment in the chat from Yolande. This is relatable. Yeah, we're all in the, everyone who's in the query trenches, who's querying, it can be a long process. And, we're all in this together. And so I'm glad that, I'm able to kind of share what I've learned, because I know a lot of querying authors don't have opportunities to, talk to agents in person or at all. And so I'm glad that I can take, what I've learned from them and bring that to you guys, because, we all need help. Everyone who's querying needs help. So I'm glad that I can help a little bit. So how do you write a synopsis? I recommend, if you outline, start with your outline and use that as kind of the backbone of your synopsis. If you don't outline, which, hello, I don't outline, reverse outline your book. And this is a useful exercise anyway. The way that I generally reverse outline is I will think about my book and I will make a list of the main plot points and character developments that are happening throughout my book, and then go through my manuscript and make sure they're all on the page. And once I have that like bare bones list of the plot points, of the emotional arcs, whatever, then I kind of flesh it out and make it pretty. I make it flow better and things like that. So definitely, if you have an outline that you wrote your book from, start with your outline. If you don't, try some reverse outline techniques. You can use mine, or you can, Google other reverse outlining techniques that might help you. But yeah, that's kind of where you want to start with your synopsis, is having your beats, your plot beats kind of listed out, and then kind of fleshing them out a little bit. But remember, you're trying to keep it as close to one page, single spaced as possible. So yeah. So, what I would do and what I have done is writing it and then cutting it down. So when I first wrote my synopsis, it was 2 pages, and I've cut it down. It's really close to 1 page now. It's like 1.5 pages. So it's close. It's getting there. And every time I read through it, I cut out a little more and a little more and a little more. So, but yeah, that's kind of my tips for writing a synopsis. All right. Okay. We're doing okay on time. We got 15 minutes. So last component that I want to talk about is your query letter. Again, this is the number one most important component of your query packet. This has to be right. And getting this right is really hard. And again, unfortunately, there is no formula for getting this right, but hopefully some of these tips that I have will help. So what is a query letter if you've never written one before? This is your book's sales pitch. It's your book's first impression. It's the first thing the agent is going to see when they look at your query packet. It's your chance to get them interested in reading your first pages at all. So kind of the main components that you need in a query letter. You need metadata. This is genre, word count, comp titles at its most basic. The agent wants to know where your book will fit in the market and they're reading it. Unfortunately, and I've seen the discussion going through in the chat, unfortunately, this can be difficult, especially if you're writing something that doesn't really seem to fit in the market. I would encourage you, even if you're writing something that doesn't really seem to fit in the market, try to think about how it does. Instead of thinking about, for this part of your query letter, for the metadata part, instead of thinking about how your book is different, which it's important to know how your book is unique, but for the metadata part of your query letter, instead of thinking about how your book is different, think about how the ways that it can fit in the market. And I think that will help to get this, because the agent really wants to have an idea of where it fits, because otherwise, if they don't have an idea of kind of where it fits in the market, they don't know how to sell it. So they're trying to get an idea from you of how they can sell your book and who they can sell it to. And so the metadata is important. Having some idea of where your book might fit in the market is important. So yeah. Then the second part of your query letter is the pitch. Many agents that I have talked to said the pitch should be character focused. You want them to get interested in your main character or your main characters, which I haven't mentioned if you're writing multi-POV, which I am. I've heard varying advice on whether you should include more than one POV in your query letter. The most recent advice that I have had from agents is, if you're writing multiple POV, include at least 2 of your main POVs in your query letter, because they want to see how they can care about more than one of your point of view characters. If you're just writing your query letter from one of your point of view characters, why are the other ones important? And they want to see that if you're writing multi-POV, they want to see that more than one character is important to the story. And so having their POVs in the book is important. So yeah, but in your pitch for your query letter, you don't want to spoil everything. Don't spoil your plot. This is not a synopsis. This is getting the agent to care about your character and their goals for the book. This is not, revealing everything about your plot time. Leave that in the synopsis. This is just a pitch to get someone to want to open your book. And then you also need to have a short bio section, something about you. This can be about, if you have any publishing history, You can write something about that in there. If you have any hobbies that are relevant to your book, or if you're writing a book about scientists and you're a scientist, tell them that. Some interesting fact about yourself that can help them get to know you a little bit more is good. This does not need to be a long bio listing all your accomplishments, just one or two things about you that are kind of relevant to the story that you're telling, and that's all. You have to get all of this in less than 400 words. So the query letter should be less than a page long. 400 words is kind of the max length that agents want to see. So if you can get it less than 400 words, great. But let's see, on the next slide, I have some tips. Let's see what's going on in the chat. Daphne said, if you have previously published titles, include those. Yeah, for sure. If you have a long list of previously published titles, don't include all of them. Just include I don't know, the top two or three. But definitely, yeah, if you have previously published anything, the agent should know about it, or they're going to want to know about it. All right, so tips for writing the query letter. And this is mainly for writing that pitch section, because in my experience, that's the hardest section. The metadata and the bio is kind of like, it's not necessarily easy, but it's not as difficult as the pitch. But so kind of the first thing is read the back cover text of books in your genre, or the inside dust jacket text of books in your genre. This is the sales pitch language you're going to see on the back covers of these books. This is kind of what you're trying to emulate in your pitch is so-and-so was, this is going to be a really cheesy one, but whatever. So-and-so grew up in, a small town, and, all of a sudden there's, enemy armies coming, and, he gets thrust into blah, blah, blah. So that's the kind of thing that you're trying to emulate, is like, what is happening and why do you care about it? You want to introduce your character or characters, if you're writing multi-POV, their goals and what's at stake if they achieve or don't achieve their goals. What's at stake? This is kind of like the main thing that an agent wants to see in your pitch, is your characters, what they're trying to do, and what's at stake if they fail or if they succeed. Don't summarize your plot, like I said. You want to leave the agent wanting to know more. Leave them with questions. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to scroll through the rest. Okay, I was trying to scroll through the chat, but I did not succeed. You want to leave them with questions of like, oh my God, what happens? How does this, what if they fail, what's going to happen to, their friend over here who's trying to do their own thing? So leave them asking questions about your book. Leave them intrigued. And remember, as you're working on it, that this is not easy for anybody. And so don't feel bad if it's hard. Writing the pitch is really hard. I have been working on my query letter for a year and a half, and I still don't think it's quite what I want it to be. So like I said at the beginning, I think with every iteration it gets better, but it's still not quite there. And it's hard also getting conflicting advice, because then you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore, because this person said I should do this thing and this person said I should do this opposite thing. So what should I actually do? So it's hard and it's frustrating and it takes practice, and just keep at it. If you're writing query letter and you're struggling, keep at it. Find people who can read it for you, other authors who can read it for you. If you have the opportunity to meet agents or to talk to agents about your query letter outside of actually querying them, take those opportunities as you can. Keep reading the back cover text of books in your genre and trying to kind of emulate that language. Those are the kinds of things that you want to do to make your query letter better. So before we move into this last section of my presentation, which I have 4 minutes left. Okay. Just very briefly, does anyone have a question? I will answer one question right now if anyone has one.
I can make a comment for sure.
Okay. One comment. Here we go.
Sorry, if Shannon's jumping in. Oh my!
I have a question from the chat. So,
okay.
Do that first.
Okay, so there was a question. I kind of answered it, but you may have a different answer. What should a person do if they are writing a blend of genres that don't often go together? Like, how do they communicate this to the agent?
Yeah, that's a good question. You can, and that's hard too, because a lot of times, a lot of agents may only represent one of those genres. What I would do, try to figure out which genre is kind of the primary genre. Is it fantasy or is it primarily like Well, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like genres that wouldn't necessarily go together. Is
Horror
it
romance.
horror? Yeah, okay, yeah. Is it primarily horror or is it primarily a romance? And then kind of pitch it as if it's primarily a romance, to talk about, it's pitch it as like a romance with elements of, suspense or, like body horror or whatever. That is really hard because a lot of agents who represent romance might not represent horror. And so when you're blending genres like that really don't seem to go together like that, it's hard to kind of pitch that to any one agent. Maybe try to think about how those genres do go together. Like I said with the think about not how your book is unique, but how it does fit into the market. Think about the elements that are common between horror and romance already, if there are any. Try to think about any similarities you can between those two genres and try to kind of pitch it that way. I hope that's answering the question because it is hard to pitch a book when you're combining two genres that aren't usually considered to go together. Coming up with a way to pitch that is very, very difficult. So I'm sorry. I feel like I'm not giving a very good answer. So I'm sorry that I can't give a better answer to that. But yeah, I don't know. Shannon, what did you say?
Yeah, so if you, in my limited experience, if you are trying to appeal to multiple genres, then you market this as an opportunity to reach out to both audiences. And I mean, in all honesty, that's how a publishing house would have to market it anyway. They would have to, throw out breadcrumbs into the different communities to see what takes. It's just more work, but.
Yeah.
As the audience, excuse me, as the Pat said, it took so long to get Outlander picked up. Much of that is because the genre did not exist for romantasy yet, and so it was a very big push. And that book is really well written. I can't speak to the subsequent books, but the first one I was captured by it. I don't like romance very much, so it is worthy. It's like it's not that this is objectively or subjectively one thing or the other. It's just like you're unfortunately having to make the forays if you are blending something and it's truly novel. But that is probably the best way to do it is like, hey, this is who I think this will appeal to. Subsets of both.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the comp titles can help. If you can say, oh, this will appeal to, fans of Lord of the Rings and fans of, I don't know, Friday Night Lights or something. If you can say like there's and a reason why it would appeal to both of those fan bases, that can really help with things like that. All right. So see, Susan has a question. We're at 201 and I have one section left.
Just real fast as a
comment.
Yeah. I was just thinking like something that always has both horror and romance are vampire stories. So you could pitch it as an unvampire type of story if it doesn't have vampires. And if it does, then you're there already.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. So, and this section is really quick. So this is just a basic section of where to look for agents. If you're starting out querying and you have no idea where to start, this will give you a jumping off point. So to find agents, I use Query Tracker. It's free. You can search for agents on Query Tracker. You can filter them by genre. You can filter by whether they're open for queries, etc. This is what my Query Manager or my Query Tracker dashboard looks like. The good thing about Query Tracker is that it links with Query Manager. So when you're sending queries using the Query Manager forms, you can link it to your Query Tracker account and it keeps track of it for you. Also,
I can't
my
see
replies.
your screen.
Oh, you can't see my screen?
No.
I can see it, so it may be a local issue to you, Susan, unfortunately.
Yeah, it says I'm screen sharing.
Is anybody else having issues?
I'm fine.
Okay.
I just have a little screenshot of my Query Tracker dashboard here. You can see my query sent and my negative. I currently have one outstanding query that has not been replied to. Or one thing that Query Tracker does do is if the query has been outstanding for over 120 days without a reply, they mark it as closed, no response, which means, they're assuming the agent has passed on it without replying to you. And so I do have several of those in there. But yeah, it keeps track. Query Manager through Query Tracker, if you link them together, they work really well together. And Query Tracker will keep track for you of all of the queries that you've sent through Query Manager forms. And they do have like a paid version of Query Tracker that has more functions. I just use the free version. It works well. You can also use Publishers Marketplace to find agents. This is a subscription-based service. You do have to have a subscription for this. It's $25 a month, so it's not cheap. But on Publishers Marketplace, you can access the deal history of agents and agencies, which you cannot do on Query Tracker. So for each agent or agency that's listed on Publishers Marketplace, you can see the deals that they've made, the books that they've sold. And that can be really useful, especially, if you're trying to find an agent who has a good track record of selling their clients' books. That can be a really useful feature. I've been considering signing up for this for at least a month to look at the agents that I have on my to query list to see which ones I should prioritize. But that can be a good tool to use. Another thing that you should do when you're querying, so there's no regulatory agency for literary agents. So it's really easy, unfortunately, for people to just say they're literary agents and not really have the connections that they need in the industry to actually sell your book. It's really easy for someone to just start a literary agency and, join Query Tracker or list themselves on Publishers Marketplace and, take queries from people. That doesn't mean, they'll be able to sell your book because they don't have the established connections in the publishing industry that they need to do that. So the only real way to kind of protect yourself in your querying agents to make sure that the agent that you're querying is legitimate is checking to see whether they or their agency are members of the AALA, which is the Association of American Literary Agents. This is kind of the only real accreditation that agents or literary agencies can get that is a valid accreditation, because they have to join the AALA, they have to have a certain number of deals and have their track record in the publishing industry has to be established, has to be proven before they can join the AALA. So definitely, before you query an agent, check to make sure if they are a member or if their agency is a member of the AALA, just to make sure you're querying legitimate agents and not someone who can't do what you need them to do as an agent. All right. So that's all I had. I'm sorry that I ran over, but like I said, the first pages, the query letter, and the synopsis could each be their own hour. But thanks for coming, y'all. I hope that this was helpful and that, if you're querying, that you feel encouraged to keep going. If you're going to start querying soon, I hope you feel like you have a good place to start from now.